Chapter 18. 4 kinds of suggestion. Mental suggestion produces its effects upon the minds of people along one or more of 4 general lines or paths of action. All the phenomena coming under this head may be placed in one or more of the 4 classes. These 4 paths or lines of action, along with mental suggestions, operates are as follows: 1. Obedience. 2. Imitation. 3. Association. 4. Repetition. I shall now proceed to consider these 4 paths or lines of action separately in order and in detail, beginning with the first mentioned line of action. Let us consider suggestion through obedience. Suggestion operating along this line consists of the induction of mental states, etc., by the agency of a positive statement, assertion, assumption, authoritative attitude, etc., which so impresses itself upon the mind of the person suggested to that he sets up no opposition or resistance, but acquiesce quietly to the suggestion made to him. The most common form of this first method of suggestion is seen in the very general acceptance to real or pretended authority on the part of the majority of people. When such people hear a statement made positively and in a tone of conviction by some person in authority, they accept the statement and feelings arising from the accepted statement without resistance and without any attempt to submit the matter to the exercise of their reason. And this is true not only when the person speaking has really a right to speak authoritatively by virtue of his knowledge, experience, wisdom, etc., but also when some pretender sets up an appearance of authority and speaking in a positive style, assuming "thus saith the Lord" of manner, impresses his hearers with the idea he wishes to suggest to them. And then the good folks meekly accept without question and allow their feelings to be aroused accordingly, for the feelings are generally followed by actions in accord therewith. It is astonishing from one point of view to see how obedient to this form of suggestion the masses of people are. They will allow their mental states, feelings, and emotion to be induced by the impudent statements and claims of cunning, shrewd, and designing men, as well as by ignorant, self-deluded fanatics who thus influence and sway them. These self-contained authorities utter their oracular statements and opinions in a tone of absolute certainty, and the crowd takes them at their own valuation. It seems to be only necessary for some positive man to attract the attention of the people and then make some bold claim or statement in the proper manner and tone and with their appearance of authority, and lo, some of the people at least fall into line. Did you ever think that people as a rule are obedient animals? Well, they are, providing you can manage to impress them with your authority. It is much easier for them to acquiesce than to refuse to do so. They find it easier to say and think yes rather than no. Their will is not often called into action by their reason and judgment, it being too often entirely under the control of the feeling and emotional side of them. There is a fundamental law under this phase of suggestive action, and in order to find it we must go back to the beginning of the race, perhaps further. In the earlier days among animals and men, there were natural leaders who ruled by force of might of body or mind. These natural leaders were implicitly obeyed by the masses, who had learned by experience that it was better for the tribe or herd as a whole to be governed by the strongest and sharpest witted members. And so gradually this dominant idea of acquiescence and obedience to authority developed and became a fixture in the race mind, and it is firmly planted in the mind of the race today, so much so that only the strongest minds are able to free themselves from it to any great extent. It is authority here and authority there in law, letters, religion, politics, and every other field of human endeavor. People do not begin by asking themselves, "What do I think about this matter?" but instead start off by saying, "What does so-and-so think of it?" Their so-and-so is their authority who does their thinking for them, and they take their keynote from him or her. The authority induces their mental states for them. If these leaders and authorities were really the wisest of the race, it would not matter so very much, although even then it might prevent the development of individuality in the masses. But the worst feature is that the majority of these authorities don't know, and know that they don't know, but the people haven't found them out. They assume the manners, air, appearance, etc. of the real thing, and the people, being accustomed by these symbols of authority and mistaking the imitation article for the real, are impressed by the authoritative utterance and accept the suggestion. This fact is well known to the classes that prey upon the public. The confidence men, in and out of the criminal class, assume this air of authority, and their suggestions are accepted by the people. They are good actors. That is one of the requisites of the suggestionist. And these people understand the law. They proceed upon the theory accredited to Ehrenberg. That remark, you may remember, was that the law is that which is boldly asserted and plausibly maintained. And so these folks keep on asserting and maintaining the law, and find that it generally goes. To see a principle in its naked simplicity, one should look for its operation in extreme instances. And the extreme instance in this case is the hypnotic subject, who has surrendered his judgment entirely to the mind of the operator. The subject will accept the most absurd suggestions from the operator and proceed to carry them into effect, and suggestion, you know, is the active factor in hypnotism, the hypnotic condition being only a psychological condition in which the effect of suggestion is heightened. But one does not have to go to the ranks of the somnambules for striking illustrations, for such are to be found in all walks of life among people who have no individuality of their own, but who seem to live and act entirely upon the say-so of others. They have no quality of initiative, but must always be told just what to do and how to do it by others. These people will accept almost any kind of suggestion, if made by others in an authoritative tone and manner.
Are becoming victims of the gurus. Rajneesh is one of India's most controversial gurus.
Rajneesh would come out twice a day in one of his 96 Rolls Royces and literally be worshipped by his thousands of Western devotees.
Not only do these things trigger emotional and mental diseases, which have been known to place people even in insane asylums for the rest of their lives, but they also recognize that these exercises can open your soul and your mind and your entire being to a takeover by demonic forces.
It is a love relationship, master and disciple. Something happens in your heart when you see a master.
Bhagwan is my master and I love him.
Bhagwan's my master.
They do not have to be persuaded by argument, but are fairly driven and ordered to do things by stronger-willed people. They are impressionables and sensitive and seem to have no wills of their own. These people are very suggestible, and every day history records many startling cases of the effect of suggestion through acquiescence on the part of such people. The keynote of this form of suggestion is a positive statement or command. given with the air and appearance of authority. The secret of the effect is the tendency upon the part of the majority of people to acquiesce in an authoritative statement or command, rather than to dispute it, and the tendency towards thinking yes rather than no. This form of suggestion is to be observed in the highest degree among those who have always depended upon others for orders or instruction, and who have not had to use their own wits and resources in life. Unskilled laborers and the sons of rich men belong to this class as a rule. These people seem to need someone to do their thinking for them, even in the smallest event of their lives, and are most suggestible along these lines. Then the degree of suggestibility along these lines decreases as we ascend among people who have had to do things for themselves, and who have not depended upon others so much. It is the slightest among people who have had the ordering of others to do, or have had to depend upon their own wits in getting through life. The men of marked degree of initiative have scarcely a trace of this form of suggestibility. Initiative, is a term for doing things without being told, using one's own wits and resources. The degree of power in giving this form of suggestion depends materially upon the development of will on the part of the suggester, and also upon his assumption of the appearance, manner, air and tone of authority, the latter requisites being the outward symbols. If one has the willpower strongly developed, the symbols will appear of themselves as a natural consequence. But to those who have not the developed willpower and whose authority is more or less counterfeit, the assumption of the outward symbols becomes a matter of great importance, and these people devote much study to the cultivation of these outward forms. And these counterfeit symbols, the art of the actor, serve their purpose to impress and suggest to the crowd, and their assumers set up a very brave front and obtained a very fair degree of success in the part they are acting. That is, until they come in contact with a man of real willpower, when they gracefully retire after the first clash of mentative swords. To those who are negative and who are too susceptible to this form of suggestion, I advise the cultivation of willpower, which will be fully taught in the later chapters of this book, entitled Mental Architecture, etc. Nothing but the cultivation of the will render one positive and impervious to suggestive influences of this sort. The second line of action of mental suggestion is called suggestion through imitation. This form of mental suggestion is very common, perhaps the most common of all the forms. Man is essentially an imitative animal. He is always copying the actions, appearance, and ideas of others, thereby going to prove his descent from the monkey-like ancestors, in whom this trait of character was largely developed. Personally, I believe that those traits of imitations may be traced back to the early days of the race, or before, when animals and men were in wild state and exposed to constant danger of attack of enemies. Then emotion of fright on the part of one would be communicated to the others of the tribe, and gradually the trait of instinctive imitation was developed, the treasures of which are still strongly with the race even to this day.
What was that?
bodies instinctively sway in imitative motion. When we watch the faces of actors on the stage, our own faces work in sympathy, more or less. And so it goes on and all around us and in us, ever the tendency towards imitation. Children manifest a great degree of this trait and copy and acquire the mannerism of those around to a surprising degree of detail. This form of mental suggestion is very common. People are constantly taking up the suggestion of the mental states, feelings and emotions of those around them and reproducing them in their own acts. The majority of people are like human sheep who will follow a leader everywhere and along all sorts of paths. Let the old bellwether jump over a rail and every sheep in the flock will do likewise, and they will keep on jumping over the same place at the same height, and even if the rail be removed before the whole flock gets over, we are constantly doing things simply because other people do them. We are constantly aping after others in our fashions, styles, forms, etc. We are servile imitators. The feeling and emotions of the instinctive part of the mind are called into sympathetic action along the lines of imitative suggestion, and physical effects follow shortly after. Shrewd men take advantage of this tendency of the human mind, and by getting a few people interested in certain things, they manage to set the fashion, and the crowd follows like sheep. Get people talking about a thing, and the contagion spreads until everybody is interested in the matter. The majority of people are more or less susceptible to this form of suggestion, the degree depending upon their habit of thinking, judging and acting for themselves. The man or woman who has ideas of his or her own is not so apt to be impressed by every wave of popular fashion. The method of curing an undue tendency toward initiative action is to start in to build up your individuality and to develop positivity along the lines mentioned in the concluding chapters of this book. The third line of action of mental suggestion is suggestion through association. This form of mental suggestion is very common. It is based upon the acquired impressions of the race by which certain words, actions, mannerism, tones, appearances, etc. are associated with certain previously experienced mental states. Mental states take form in physical action and expression, as we know. A man feeling in a certain way is apt to express himself by certain actions or in certain words. These actions and words thus become symbols of the mental state producing them, and consequently they produce upon the mind of the person seeing or hearing them the mental image connected with that mental state, and this mental image is calculated to induce a similar or corresponding state in the mind of the person seeing and hearing, so that these symbols are really mental suggestions, since they tend to induce mental states. I wish to remind you that every written, printed or spoken words or words is the outward and physical expression of some inner mental state of the person uttering or writing the words. The words are the outward and visible sign of an inward feeling. Mere words in themselves have no suggestive value. The value depends upon the meaning impressed upon them by the mind of the person using them, accompanied by an understanding of their meaning by the person hearing or reading them. The word horror, for instant or uncanny, has a definite meaning to a person familiar with it. It bears a direct relation to a mental feeling or emotion and is the physical and outward expression of the same. One may say the word over and over again to a person who has never heard it, or to one of another race who does not understand the term, and no suggestive effect follows. But speak the word to one who is accustomed to connect and associate it with a definite feeling that they have experienced, and the feeling will be produced or induced if the circumstances of the use of the word be favorable. The word love, used properly, will awaken in the mind of its hearers feelings corresponding with the term, and these feelings must have been experienced before, either directly or indirectly, before they may be induced by the suggestion. Feelings experienced by one's ancestors leave a record in one's subconscious mentality, which may also be induced by the appropriate suggestion. Personally, words seems to me to be like the wax records of the phonograph. The record is covered with minute impressions produced by the sound waves entering the phonograph. Place this record in its place in the phonograph and start the latter in motion, and behold, the minute impressions on the record will reproduce or induce in the diaphragm the same kind of sound waves that originally caused the impression. In this way, a word, which is the physical symbolic record of feeling, will produce its associated feeling in the mind of the person hearing or reading it. And, as I have said, the feeling produced will depend largely upon the understanding of the meaning of the word held by the person receiving the impression. For instance, in the case of the word love, let us suppose that the term is strongly and feelingly suggested to a number of persons at the same time and in the same way. You will find that the feeling induced in the one person will be that of love of parents, in another love of children, in another love of husband or wife, in another love of God, in another an exalted affection for some person of the opposite sex, in another the low animal passion for one of the other sex, and so on, each experiencing a feeling occasioned by his or her association of the word with some feeling previously entertained. The same word may induce a feeling of the greatest pleasure in one person and the greatest horror or disgust in another, the difference depending upon the association of the word in the mind of the two persons. I have dwelt upon these facts in order to make clear to you that there is no magic power in words in themselves, and that all their force and effect depend upon the associated feeling of which they are the crystallized physical and outward former symbol. The word is the body, the feeling is its soul. And so it is with the suggestion of appearance, manner, surroundings, etc. Each of these depends for force and effect upon some accustomed association with some inner feeling, which feeling is reproduced or induced by the outward symbol of the thing. We associate certain things with certain feelings, and when we see these things, we are apt to experience the feeling indicated. People have been overcome by the sight of a picture or a scene in a play, a song, a poem, or suggestive music. And here is where the art of the suggestionist comes into play. He watches closely and discovers that certain words, tones, manners, appearance, actions, motion, etc. are associated in the minds of people with certain feelings and ideas. And so when he wishes to reproduce, produce, or induce in others these ideas or feelings, he simply reproduces the associated physical symbols in words, manner, motion, or appearance, and the effect is produced. The conjurer makes certain motions with his hand, which you have always associated with certain action, and you feel that the action itself has been performed, but the conjurer omits the action, and you are fooled. The confidence man assumes the appearance and manners and actions which you have always associated with certain qualities of character, and you feel that he is what he seems to be, but he isn't, and you are fooled. This play acting of people in all form of suggestion, and you are fooled because you accept the symbol for the reality, unless you understand the game. The actor assumes the action, tones, dress, and words of certain characters, and if he is a good actor, you forget the reality and laugh and weep, and otherwise feel that what you see is reality, although you really know underneath it all that it is only a play, and all this is mental suggestion. Remember now and always that a mental suggestion operates by the presentation of the outward symbol associated with the feeling to be induced. Put the right record in the phonograph and the corresponding sound is produced or induced. Do you see? This law underlies all the phenomena of mental suggestion. Understand the law of suggestion and you have the master key to the phenomena. Oratory and other forms of appeal to the feelings by spoken words gives us a typical example of the operation of this form of mental suggestion. The orator, the lawyer, the preacher, each uses words calculated to induce mental states, feelings and emotions in the minds of his hearers. Such a one soon begins to learn the suggestive value of words, tones and expression. He avoids the use of cold, abstract words and drifts into the use of those which are symbols for deep feeling and emotion, knowing that these word symbols uttered with a proper tone and expression will induce the feeling for which they stand in the minds of the hearers. The hearer's emotions and feelings are played upon in this way like an instrument. The emotion of passion, whether it be love, fear, hate, greed, patriotism, courage, jealousy, sympathy, etc., is awakened by the skillful use of the words, tones and expressions which stand as symbols for these feelings. If you will remember how you were touched by an address that afterwards seemed to you to be hyperbolic or flamboyant, without argument, proof or sense, then you will realize how you were made the subject of mental suggestion through association. The skillful salesmen operate upon you in the same way. So does his twin brother, the advertising man. The revivalist has this art reduced to a perfect science. Words, 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 inciders to actions, inducers of feeling, symbol of mental states, and reproducers of mental states. Despise them not, for they have brought down low the mightiest of minds. When properly used, even when written, their potency is great. Countries have often been made captive by a clever phrase, which when analyzed meant nothing in reason, merely an awakener of feelings. Let me make the catchphrases of a country, and I care not who makes its laws. The man best adapted to employ this form of suggestion is he who is more or less of an actor, that is, who possesses the faculty of throwing expression and feeling into words, actions, and manner. Good orators, pleaders, salesmen, and others have this faculty largely developed. It belongs to the feminine side of the phenomena, for it has the charming, drawing, leading aspect, and works by the employment of the emotive pole of mentation, rather the will of the motive pole, as in the case of the first mentioned phase of suggestion, that of authoritative statement or command. It operates not by beating down the will of the other person, but rather by inducing a sympathetic rhythm of feeling and emotion which overpowers his own will and causes it to act accordingly. One should ever be on guard against this kind of influence. The best way to escape it is to adopt the policy of never acting immediately in response to an appeal of this kind. Rather wait until the effect has worn off, and then submit the matter to the consideration of your reason and judgment. Of course, the cultivation of willpower will act as a shield or armor, protecting you from the subtle vibration of this kind, for this form of suggestion is usually accompanied by strong mentative currents from the mind of the speaker. Fence yourself off from a too ready response to sympathetic appeals along the emotional lines. Let the head stand by the heart, ready to prevent its running away with you. Man should have the reason in the ascendant, not the emotional nature. When you feel yourself being carried off your feet by some emotional excitement, steady yourself and ask your mind this question: is this a mental suggestion? The question will tend to bring you to your state of equilibrium. When you know what a mental suggestion is, then you will learn to recognize them and be on the lookout for them. This state of mind will act as a strong, neutralizing agent for the most skillfully put suggestion. Have your torpedo nets out, no matter how secure you may imagine yourself to be. One caution more: be especially cautious and slow to accept a suggestion when you are worn out, tired, or in a passive, pleasurable state. That is, whenever your will is resting or else exhausted. On these occasions, when in doubt, say no. You will save yourself much regret by remembering this bit of advice. It is based on a proven psychological law. I have learned this law by bitter personal experience. Remember it. Okay, let us consider the fourth line of action of mental suggestion: suggestion through repetition. This form of mental suggestion is quite common, and the study of its manifestations is quite interesting, for it brings into operation a well-known psychological principle which has its correspondence in the physical world. Constant dripping will wear away the hardest stone. You know the story of the man who told his favorite lie so often that he believed it himself? Well, this is a psychological fact. People have started in to make certain appearance of truth in words or manner by assuming something to be true that was not so. Then they kept on repeating the thing, adding a little here and a little there, until the thing got to be a fixed idea with them, and they actually believed it. And if a person can suggest himself into accepting a false belief in this way, you can see how it will operate on others. The secret of the operation of this form of suggestion lies in the psychological facts of weakened resistance through repetition of the attack and the force of habit. The first time an unaccustomed suggestion is made, the mind sets up an active resistance. But the next time it is presented, the suggestion is not quite so unfamiliar as before, and a lessened resistance is set up, and so on, until at last no resistance is interposed, and the suggestion is accepted. Like the well-known verse, vice is a monster of so frightful men, that to be hated needs but to be seen, but seen too often, familiar with her face, we first endure, then pity, then embrace. And this rule holds good with suggestions. We first resist them, then endure them, then accept them, unless we understand the law. The psychological fact involved in this form of suggestion is that impressions upon brain cells become deepened by constant repetition. It is like sinking a die into a cake of wax. It goes deeper at each pressure. The mind is very apt to accept as true anything that it finds deeply impressed upon its record. It has become accustomed to finding these deep impressions only when they have been made by repeated efforts of its own intellect or judgment or experience, and so when it finds these deep impressions that have been placed there by repeated suggestions of others, it is apt to discriminate. It finds itself feeling these things that have been repeatedly impressed upon it. This Illegitimate mental impressions are nurtured as one's very own. There is a constant struggle for existence upon the part of the ideas or mental images impressed upon me. The strong crowd out the weak, and in the majority of cases the strongest ones are those which have either been impressed in a vivid manner or else by repetition. The second time you meet a man, you may have trouble in remembering him, but the third time it is easier, and so on, until at last you forget that he never was a stranger. And so it is with these suggested ideas. You grow familiar with them through repetition, they lose their strangeness to you, and at last you cease to concern yourself about them. A strange thing is generally inspected, examined, viewed suspiciously, etc. But after the strangeness is worn off, you cease to exercise the former caution. Familiarity breeds contempt, and also lack of caution. Suggestion gains force by each repetition. This is one of the fundamental laws of suggestion, and one that all should remember. If you would take mental stock of yourself, you would find that you entertain a vast number of feelings, ideas, and opinions, which you possess simply through the law of repeated suggestion. You have heard certain things affirmed over and over again until you have come to accept them as facts, notwithstanding that you possess not the slightest personal knowledge of any logical proof concerning them. Shrewd moulders of public opinion employ this law, and constantly repeat a certain thing in varying words and style until at last the public accept it as a proven and unquestioned fact. Many a man has gained a reputation for wisdom merely because his friends repeatedly affirm it, and the public accepted the suggestion. Many a statesman has had a reputation built up for him by friendly newspaper correspondents, whose constantly repeated suggestions have caused the idea to crystallize in a material form in the public mind. And many a reputation has been destroyed by the repeated shrugs, sneers, and insinuations of gossips and evil wishes. Advertisers understand this law and keep the repeated suggestion of the merit of their wares constantly before the public mind, until it becomes gospel with the people. If at first you don't succeed, and never take no for an answer, are two axioms very dear to the heart of the man who uses suggestion in his business. Do not be deceived by this subtle form of suggestion. Do not imagine that an untrue thing becomes true because it is repeated often. Do not allow your judgment to be lulled to sleep by this drowsy repetition of the slumber song. Keep awake, keep awake. An understanding of this law of suggestion will throw light on many things that have puzzled you heretofore. Think over it a bit when you have the time. Chapter 19. How Suggestion is Used. Let us now consider the various forms of application of suggestion in everyday life. There are several, and for convenience I separate them into three forms. Number 1 is involuntary suggestion, number 2 is voluntary suggestion, and 3, autosuggestion. Let us consider the first form. Involuntary suggestion. By this term, I mean the use of suggestion involuntarily without a particular purpose, or unconsciously. We are giving suggestion of words, manner, action, etc. every moment of our lives. And these suggestions are constantly being accepted by those around us. We are constantly influencing those with whom we come in contact, the greater part of the work being performed unconsciously by us. We are acting as living inspiration for some and living discouragement for others, according to circumstances. Our moods, actions, words, appearances, manners, etc. act as suggestions to those around us. I'm not now speaking of the effect of mentative currents, etc., but of mental suggestion, pure and simple. A business house is permeated by the personality of its head, and his personal characteristics impress themselves upon those under him. By the means of suggestion, he sets the gait of the place. If he is active and enterprising, so are the workers employed by him, and if he is careless and shiftless, so will they be apt to be. We affect those around us by our mental attitudes, manifested in action, and they affect us if we allow them to do so. Children are quite amenable to suggestion of this sort, being natural imitators, and they soon take on the mental attitude of the parents towards them. If the parents treat the child as being beyond control, the child will respond. If the child be considered obstinate, etc., he will take on the suggestion, and the original trouble will be magnified. People talk before their children, little realizing that the little minds are very suggestible and are constantly taking suggestive color from those around them. People should endeavor to present to their children only the best, positive, helpful, uplifting, and encouraging mental states. They should avoid giving the child the impression that it is bad, or mean, or deceitful, or shy, or anything of that sort. The child will be apt to accept the suggestion coming from a source that it naturally looks to for information, and it will be very apt to proceed to act upon the suggestion and make the words of the parent come true. I've heard of children who have been so impressed with their parents' suggestion that they would come to some bad end yet, but they had to fight against it, the balance of their lives. Sow the suggestive seeds that you desire to sprout into reality. Be careful to select the right kind of seeds.
Hi Heather, so you've come to tell me about your favourite book for the Summer Reading Challenge. Have you been reading many books?
Yes, I have been reading a lot of books. I've read 6 so far, and this is like my 7th, obviously, because I've read 6 so far. And I'm really enjoying reading them, and this one, my 7th, it's just really good. I like it.
What do you like about it?
Well, basically, it's about an element hunter, and I'm very interested in the elements as well. So, like, not the fire, earth, wind, and stuff, but elements. I'm interested in the periodic table elements. So, yeah, this is about a boy who is an element hunter, and he finds a new type of element by accident. Well, actually, he's trying to find an element called uranium, but then he accidentally finds a new element instead of the uranium that he wants.
Right, it sounds like a really, really interesting book then.
It's supposed, and then they did some tests on it, and they found out that it was 126th element. So they didn't make a name for it, but they tried to destroy it because it's very, very radioactive.
Right, so in the book, you've said that there's different elements. Are there lots of different characters in there?
Yes, there are lots of different characters. The main character is called Itch because his mum and dad called him Itchingham, but he shortened it to Itch. And he's got a sister called Chloe and a cousin called Jack.
What was the best bit of your book?
I'd say probably the bits where I don't know. I like the whole book, but I do like the bits at the beginning where there's an explosion, and I also like the bit at the end where he finally destroys the 126th element.
Well, we've got a few people waiting, so I'm going to gift you with your next part of the reading challenge. We would like you to carry on. You've said you've read lots of books, but we would like you to choose some more from the library. Okay, so you've got your pull-out poster here where you can mark off how you've been getting on. Okay, so there's space for you to write about each one. You've also got your postcard here, which fits into one of the areas here. Okay, so you can just slide it in. Some of the ones that you'll collect over the next few weeks that you visit over the summer holidays, they are scratch and sniff, so you've got some weird and wonderful smells to learn about and lots of wonderful Roald Dahl information as well. So well done for reading so well. I shall give you that.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next time we're in the library.
Thank you very much.
This subject of suggestions to children can be merely alluded to here, for it would fill a book of itself. I felt impelled to say a few words about it in these lessons because my experiences taught me its extreme importance. This is the rule of involuntary suggestion. Our words, our actions, our manner, our tone, our appearance, and general personality convey suggestions to those around us, inducing mental states in accordance therewith. Therefore, act out only the character that you wish to impress upon the world, and act it the best you know how. The world will connect you with the part you are playing, according to the suggestions thus made. Sometimes you will get a better verdict than you really deserve, sometimes a worse one. But in either event, your mental attitude, reflected by your involuntary suggestions, will have caused the verdict, whatever it may be. Therefore, form a correct mental attitude based upon some ideal of the part you wish to play, and then play it out to the best of your ability. Observe the outward appearance of the part you are playing, for this is what the world sees first, last, and all the time, and you are judged by your suggestive makeup and stage action. Act well your part, for thereupon rests the verdict of the audience. The second form of application of suggestion is voluntary suggestion. This form of application of suggestion is manifested in cases in which the suggestion is deliberately and purposely made with the end of impressing other persons. Its manifestations may be grouped into three classes as follows: A. Suggestive treatment, B. Hypnotic suggestion, and C. Suggestion in the form of personal influence. By a suggestive treatment, I refer to the practice of mental suggestion used as a form of treatment for physical ills or mental deficiencies, etc. The treatments for physical ills come under the term of mental therapeutics and will be spoken of in the chapter bearing the title. Treatment for suggestion for mental deficiencies, etc., is a branch of science that is rapidly coming to the fore. For some time it was clouded by its mistaken connection with hypnotism, but now that it has been divorced therefrom, it is being used to a much greater degree by scientists in all parts of the world. Its principle rests on the fact that brain centers and brain cells may be grown, developed, and increased by properly directed suggestions, so that one may be practically made over mentally. New qualities may be induced and objectionable ones decreased, objectionable habits and traits may be eliminated, and desirable ones substituted or newly induced. The wonders of this form of practical psychology are being unfolded rapidly, and a great era is before us in this branch of science. The broad principles of the treatment lies in the fact that the mental states induced by the proper suggestions tend to exercise and develop to the portion of the brain in which they are manifested. Hence, the theory, once understood and the best method adopted, the rest of the treatment becomes as simple as developing any muscle of the body by the appropriate exercise. I call this form of treatment brain building by suggestion. B. Suggestion in hypnotism is a subject that I shall merely refer to here. for this is not a manual for hypnotism. Sufficient is to say that hypnotism is a combination of the use of mentative energy in a certain form coupled with suggestion. It is a proven psychological fact that in the hypnotic condition, all suggestions have a greatly exaggerated effect, and a suggestion that would scarcely be noticed in the ordinary state becomes a strong motive force to one in the state of hypnosis. In this state, the most absurd suggestions are accepted and acted upon, the most extraordinary delusions are entertained, and the suggestions of future actions or post-hypnotic suggestions are made effective. I wish to caution students against allowing themselves to be hypnotized for experimental or other purposes. It is conducive to negative conditions, and I heartily disapprove of the practice. I would not allow anyone to hypnotize me, and I would urge upon my students a similar attitude towards experimenters. The best efforts of suggestions may be obtained without hypnosis. The latter is merely an abnormal and morbid state, most undesirable to normal people. Leave it alone. See, suggestion in personal influence is referred to in other parts of this work, and appears more fully in the chapters treating of personal influence, for it belongs to that phase of the general subject. The third form of application of suggestion is what is known as auto-suggestion. By this term is mental self-suggestion, or suggestions given by one to his own mind. This is most interesting and important phase of the subject, and will be dealt with fully in the chapters of mental architecture, etc., under which head it falls. It is by autosuggestion that so many people have made themselves over mentally, and have become that which they willed to be. Its principles are precisely the same as in the other forms of suggestion, except that the treatment is given by one's self instead of by another person. The vehicles of suggestions, that is, the voice, the manner, etc., have been alluded to in other chapters as we proceeded. An eminent teacher of the use of suggestion in commercial pursuits, in speaking of the effect of suggestions in inducing mental states, says, "You can make a man think with you if you work on his feelings or higher nature, even though you run counter to his ordinary judgment. If in this way you can dazzle his reason sufficiently, you can sour him to almost any action of which man is capable." And this teacher is perfectly right in this statement. Although he follows the old subjective mind idea and identifies feeling with the higher nature, instead of treating it as belonging to the emotive pole of mentation. And, if I may be pardoned, I would suggest that the above statement would be a little nearer the truth state of affairs if he had said, "You can make a man feel with you if you work on his emotive mentality." The teachers of business psychology very ably instruct their pupil in the art of suggestion in the process of making sales. They instruct the salesman to first gain the prospective customer's attention, then arouse his interest, then awaken desire, and then close the sale. These steps in the psychology of salesmanship apply equally well to the science of advertising or any other appeal to the minds of people, and are logically correct. The attention once gained, the mind becomes more or less receptive. The mind once receptive, interest is aroused, and a greater degree of receptivity is induced. Interest is gradually led to desire, induced by the subtle suggestions of words and exhibition of the article to be sold, and at last, when the proper psychological state is aroused, this framed salesman gently but firmly gives the positive suggestion of authority or demand, pointing to the place where the customer must sign his name, thus using suggestion along both the lines of acquiescence and imitation, and the order is taken. Thus, using suggestion along the lines of acceptance and imitation, and the order is taken. Did you ever subscribe to a book at the solicitation of a good book agent? Well, if he did, and will let your mind run backward over the proceedings, you will see how the above rule works in practice. 1. Attention. 2. Interest. 3. Desire. 4. Sale. These are the steps of salesmanship by suggestion, and advertising sales as well. Great is suggestion in business. I have known salesmen to gently suggest the closing of a sale by handing the customer a fountain pen placed at the suggestive slant, at the same time pointing to the space and the order blank with take it for granted tone and utterance. Sign right here, please. And it was signed. The largest employers of agents have regular training schools in which the new agents are given the benefit of experience of the old hands at the business. And some of these old hands could give a professional suggestionist points on his own science. The agent is told how the different classes of people act, the objections they will be likely to raise, and how the trained agent may overcome these obstacles by clever work, including, of course, an intelligent use of suggestion. The average person would be surprised at the ideas advanced and the knowledge of suggestion possessed by some of these men. One of these agents once told me that one of the first things he learned when starting to work was that the agent should never permit the customer to take his prospectus or sample pages in his own hands. He said to me, I always keep the prospectus in my hands, for if I let it get away from me, I will have lost the power of controlling the attention and interest of the customer. He will then have the matter in his own hands and will have gotten away from me. He will then do the leading instead of my doing it. I always keep the upper hand of my man or woman. I do the leading, guiding, directing, and influencing myself. I keep the controlling gear in my own hands always. And in the science of advertising also, there is a constant use of suggestion, usually conscious and premeditated. This is taught in the courses and schools of advertising, and the ad men are well grounded on this subject. The use of the direct command, as the ad men call it, is very common. People are positively told to do certain things in these advertisements. They are told, take home a cake of Hinky Dink's soap tonight, your wife needs it. And they do it. Or they see a mammoth hand pointing down at them from a sign and almost hear the corresponding mammoth voice as it says in painted words, say you smoke honey dope cigars, they're the best ever. And if you manage to reject the command the first time, you will probably yield at the repeated suggestion of the same thing being hurled at you at every corner and high fence, and honey dope will be your favorite brand until some other suggestion catches you. Suggestion by authority and repetition, remember, that's what does the business for you. They call this direct command in the advertising schools. Then there are other subtle forms of suggestion in advertising. You see staring from every bit of space on billboard and in newspapers and magazine or something of that sort, and you usually wind up by accepting. And then you are constantly told that babies howl for grandma's hanking infantile soother. And then when you hear some baby howling, you think of what you have been told they are howling for, and then run and buy a bottle of Grandma Hankins. Or that some kind of cocoa is grateful and refreshing. Or that some brand of soap is 99.999% pure. And that some pickle man makes 763 varieties, etc. Only last night I saw a new one. Somebody's whiskey is smooth, and every imbiber in the car was smacking his lip and thinking about the smooth feeling in his mouth and throat. It was smooth, the idea, not the stuff. And some other whiskey man shows a picture of a glass, a bottle, and some ice, and a siphon of seltzer, with simply these words, Old Boys Highball, that's all. All of these things are suggestions, and some of them very powerful ones too. When constantly impressed upon the mind by repetition, they get in their work on you. A writer on the psychology of advertising advises, among other things, that advertisements of articles to eat or drink should contain the words calculated to induce the feeling of taste in the minds of the readers, like sweet, refreshing, thirst-quenching, nourishing, etc. How suggestive they are and how effective. How do they act, if you ask? Well, this way. If you read these words, a nice, big, juicy lemon, tart and strong, I can taste it now. Imagine these words accompanied by a picture of a man squeezing the juice of a lemon into his mouth. And where are you? I'll tell you where. Your mouth is filled with saliva from the imagined taste of the tart lemon juice. Tell this to some of your friends and see how it works. I once heard a story of a bad little boy who would stand in front of the German band with a lemon to his mouth, sucking away vigorously. Result? The mouths of the musicians became filled with so much saliva that they could not play on. I have known of dealers in spring goods to force the season by filling their windows with advance stock. I have seen hat dealers start up the straw hat season by putting on a straw themselves, their clerks as well, and then a few more friends. The sprinkling of straws gave the suggestion to the street, and the straw hat season was opened. Businessmen understand it, and so do the newsboys. The good ones say boldly and confidently, "Here's your paper, mister," sticking it under their noses, and they take it. I have seen men in bowling alleys caused to make false plays by some bystander suggesting the false shot. The same thing is true in shooting galleries. You have but to look around you and see these everyday instances of suggestion in some form or other. Induced feeling, remember? That is the key to all manifestations of suggestion. Look out for it. And in conclusion, I know of a little boy who exemplified the law of suggestion one April Fool's Day by placing a sign on the coat tail of another boy. The sign read, "Kick me," and they did. The skillful lawyer uses suggestion in his work in examining or cross-examining witnesses. He suggests things to a suggestible witness and coaxes and leads him on to admissions and statements that he did not intend making, sometimes statements that are not strictly correct. It is also charged that police detectives have worked false confessions out of suggestible criminals in this way, by keeping hammering away at them until their wills are worn out, and they would say yes to escape further questioning, like the girl who finally accepted the lover's repeated proposal in order to get rid of them. This firm, decided, authoritative statement or demand, when allied to the law of repetition, has caused so much mischief in the world, and many have given in to it to their sorrow. I trust that these warning words will save some other trouble of this kind. When the law is once understood, it is comparatively easy to escape the suggestion. The strength in the suggester of this kind rests in the ignorance of the person suggested. Forewarned is forearmed in this case. I have heard of businessmen who would instruct their clerks to ask questions of their customers in this way: "You like this pattern, do you not?" Or, "This is a beautiful shade, is it not?" etc. Do you see the point? The statement is made first, and the question is asked right on top of it. Isn't it easier to say yes than no to this kind of question? You see, I asked the question in that way myself, although I had no intention of doing so. I took my own suggestion. In this connection, I may add that it is a well-known psychological fact that when two persons are conversing, the one standing or sitting higher than the other has the advantage of a certain positive attitude or position, and the person seated below the speaker is forced into a relatively passive or negative condition or position. That is, everything else being equal, the person elevated will be positive to the other, and the one seated on a lower level will be passive, relatively. The raised platform of the teacher, speaker, preacher, etc. has a good psychological basis, and the power that a lawyer feels when talking on his feet to the jury seated in front of him is a manifestation of a law that he may not be aware of, but the judge has the best of the lawyer, for the latter must look up to him when he talks. Try the experiment of practicing the above position with some friend, first one being seated and then the other, and see how you can actually feel the difference between the two positions. The raised position of the clerks in the large stores and the low seats so accommodatingly placed for the customers have good reasons. If you ever feel that someone is placing you in a negative or passive condition, rise to your feet and you will feel doubly strong and forceful. This is a little hint that may be worth many times the price of this book to you. Some of these days, look over the foolish things that you have talked or influenced into, and see if you were not seated and the other person standing, or seated higher than you. This is a little thing, but it works big results sometimes. There is a great difference in the suggestibility of persons, some being almost immune from suggestion, while others are so suggestible that they have but to be told a thing in a positive, forceful, confident, authoritative tone and manner to accept the suggestion, particularly if it is repeated several times. They will likewise readily absorb the suggestions of imitations and association, but I have told you about this elsewhere in this lesson. Study those around you and you will soon discover the different degrees. The hypnotic subject is at the extreme negative end of this scale. I now wish to call your attention to what may be called future suggestion, or as hypnotists call it, post-hypnotism. Future suggestions are like seeds planted in the mind, which grow, blossom, and bear fruit at some time in the future. The hypnotists produce this phenomenon by giving the subject, while in the hypnotic condition, the suggestion that at a certain time, either in a few minutes, hours, or days, he will do certain things or feel certain things. But the newer school of psychologists have discovered that these future suggestions may be made in the ordinary receptive state, just as is the case with any of the other forms of mental suggestion, and the results will be the same as that obtained by the hypnotists in spite of their theories and methods. I do not propose going into details regarding this class of phenomena because all that is necessary to be said can be comprised in the following two statements. 1. That generally speaking, all the phenomena of the ordinary immediate mental suggestions may be produced as future suggestion. And 2. that all the phenomena of future suggestion produced by the suggester upon another person may be likewise produced by autosuggestions, that is, by the person inducing suggestions in himself. Many foolish suggestions are given in everyday life along the lines of future suggestion, and alas, many of them are accepted carelessly, owing to a lack of knowledge of the principle. How many times has it been said to an impressionable young bride, "Never mind, you'll grow tired of him after a while," etc. Or to a man, "Wait until the novelty wears off and you'll see how sick of the job you'll get." Or, "You'll lose your interest and enthusiasm by and by," or, "You'll find him out after a while and will see that he's not what he seems," and so on. You may add to these instances from your own experience. And too often, these suggestions are recalled and have a tendency to cause the person to make them come true.
Ng palad mo, ambisyoso ka, marami ka ambisyon. Pero dumarating yung oras na nagugulo ang kaisipan mo kung ano ba uunahin mo. Pero sa health mo, ingatan mo, careful. Kasi ang signals mo nasa katalino, wala sa tubig, wala sa palad, nasa katalino life. Yan ang signals mo. Pero may start ka sa business. You travel, bilang 5 times or around the world dyan sa buhay. Makasenso ka naman. Mayroon ka lang ugali na tao.
Ang naguhula, hindi naman masama. Parang guide sa tao yun. Nakakatulong kami sa hindi nila alam, kami ang nag-explain. Yan. Sa 20 years ko dito, hanggang ngayon buhay pa ako. Dito sa Quiapo, tahimik naman kami dito. Wala namang gulo, wala kaming away, tahimik ang buhay namin. Itong kinikita namin para lang sa aming pamilya, sa aking mga apo, kasi tama lang sa aming pagkain. Minsan wala kaming kinikita. Yan ang takbo ng buhay dito sa Manguhula. Wala kaming atraso sa kapwa naming tao.
Many fortune tellers' prophecies have been made come true in this way by impressionable and ignorant people. I've given you a key to this principle now. Heed the lesson. If you feel that an attempt at future impression being made on you, neutralize it with a mental "No, I won't." That is the antidote for this. The second principle in the statement made several paragraphs further back, that is, that all the phenomena of future suggestion may be duplicated by autosuggestion or suggestions made by oneself, is true and worthy of consideration. You make up your mind that you must awaken to catch a train at 4 o'clock tomorrow morning, and you awaken in time. You have set your mental alarm clock. If you had an engagement at 3 o'clock this afternoon, you may set your alarm as follows, talking to yourself. Now see here, remember that you must see Smith or whoever at 3 o'clock this afternoon. Three, I say. Remember now, 3, I say. And if you impress it sufficiently strong upon your mind, a little before 3 you will begin to feel uneasy, and then suddenly your Smith engagement will pop into your mind from your subconscious region, and you will reach out for your hat and overcoat. Mental alarm clock, remember? That tells the whole tale. You see, the experimenter giving future suggestions simply sets the mental alarm and attaches it to the mental alarm clock. When the alarm goes off, the suggestion emerges into the field of consciousness and acts just as if it had been freshly made. That's the whole story in plain, homely terms. Don't be frightened, you timid people. Remember this, that you will not accept a future suggestion unless you would also accept a present suggestion. The degree of suggestibility is the same in both cases. The only reason a future suggestion has the advantage over a present one is that it is more subtle, and people are not as much on guard about future things as they are about things to be done right now. You will resent a suggestion that you do these things right now, please, while you pay but little attention to the earnest suggestion that in a year from now you will feel so and so about this matter, and dismiss the subject with a shrug of the shoulders instead of saying, at least mentally, no, I won't. The present suggestion is apt to attract your attention the more forcibly because it is more apparent, while the future suggestion is more insinuating. But now that you know the facts of the matter, you may laugh at them both and take the sting out of them by your little "no, I won't." And just one word more: if you feel that you are harboring any future suggestions made on you in the past, but upon which the alarm has not yet gone off, you may kill them by direct self-suggestion or autosuggestions to the contrary. That is, you may say, I shall not act upon any adverse suggestions that may have been made to me. I will them out of my mind. I kill them this moment by the power of my will. And at the same time, make a mental picture of the suggestion being obliterated by the action of your will, just as the chalk mark is erased from the blackboard by the passing over it of the eraser. Try this plan and be free. Chapter 20. Induced Imagination. There is a form of suggestion which tends to arouse activities in the imaginative regions of the minds of people. Of course, the imagination plays a part in all manifestations of suggestion, but in this particular form its action is especially apparent. I call this class of phenomena induced imagination. The term imagination, you know, means the power of the mind to create mental images of objects of sense, the power to reconstruct or recombine the materials furnished by experience, memory or fancy, a mental image formed by the faculty of imagination, etc. The word is derived from the English word image, which in turn has for its root the Latin word imitare, meaning to imitate. The imagination is creative in its nature and works with the plastic materials of the mind. The writers usually make a distinction between what is called imagination proper on the one hand and what is called fancy on the other. By imagination proper is meant the higher forms of activity of the image-creating faculty, such as is manifested in the creation of literature, art, music, philosophical theory, scientific hypothesis, etc. By fancy is meant the lighter forms of the manifestation of the image-creating faculty, such as the ideal fancies of the day and daydreams of people, the arbitrary and capricious imaginings fantasies, etc. Imagination proper may be considered as a positive phase, and fancy as the negative phase of the image-creating faculty. Imagination in its positive phase is a most important faculty of the human being. It lies at the basis of active mental manifestations. One must form a mental image of a thing before he can manifest in an objective form. It is distinctly creative in its nature and really forms the mold into which deeds and actions are cast. It forms the architect's plans, which we use to build our life of action and deeds. And mind you this, it is the faculty used in visualization which is spoken of in other chapters. Positive imagination is very far from being the fanciful, capricious, light, whimsical thing that many suppose it to be. It is one of the most positive manifestations of the mind. Not only does it proceed and is necessary to the performance of the objective acts and the producing of material things, but it is also the faculty by which we impress our mental images upon the minds of others by mentative induction and by uses of desire and will. Positive imagination is the mother of ideas. An idea is but an image formed in the mind, and the imagination is the faculty in which the image or idea is formed. And in proportion to the activity of the imagination, so is the strength of the image or idea. And as is the strength of the image or idea, so is the degree of its power to impress itself upon the minds of others. So, you see, imagination in its positive phase is a strong, real thing, but it is largely with its negative phase that we shall have to deal with here. You know that your negative imagination or fancy may be aroused by outward persons or things. You might hear a piece of music, and before you know it, your fancy is running along, painting all sorts of pictures in your mind and inducing all sorts of feelings. A picture may affect you in the same way. A piece of pottery or poetry or poem may lift you out of yourself on the wings of fancy. A book may carry you along in a world of fantasy and unreality until you forget the actual world around you. Have you not had that experience before? And more marked than any of the above-mentioned cases is the effect of a perfect stage performance in which the world and characters of the play take such a hold upon you as to seem reality itself, and you laugh and cry with the characters of the play. You scowl at the villain and tremble at the danger of the heroine. You glory in the hero's success and shed tears at the sorrows and trials of the suffering characters. And you feel these things in proportion that your negative imagination or fancy is called into activity by induction. But remember this, the actor's poet, writer, composer, or artist created his effect by the exercise of his or her positive imagination, while the effect upon you is induced in your negative imagination. The first is an act of positive creation, while the second is merely a reflection impressed upon your mind by either the suggestion or the mentative energy of the actor. In your consideration of the above, remember that I have said about suggestion in an earlier chapter. Suggestion is merely the presentation of the outward symbol of the inner feeling. The radical wing of the school of suggestionists pooh-poohed the idea of mentative energy having anything to do with the phenomena which we are now considering. They claim that suggestion is sufficient to account for it all. Without going deeply into a discussion of this matter, I would ask these gentlemen, why is it that the same words uttered in the same tone by two different suggestors produce widely different degrees of effect? Also, what is that peculiar personal force that we feel when certain persons suggest that is absent in the suggestion of others? My answer is that the difference lies in the degree of feeling called into activity of the mind of the suggester, the degree of mentative energy released by him or her, and I think that any careful investigator will agree with me in this, if he will open his mind to all the impressions received during his investigations, instead of tying himself to a previously conceived theory. The theories of suggestions are not contrary to those of mentative energy and induction when properly understood. The facts of the suggestionists are undoubted, but they make the mistake of ignoring the mental states of the suggestionist. They think that their effects are produced by suggestion alone, and forget the mental state behind the suggestion, which is the real motive force. If their theories be true, why is it that two men, using the same words of suggestion upon the same subject, produce varying degrees of effect? It is because the mental states or dynamic mentation of the two men vary in quality and degree. In connection with this subject of negative imagination or fancy, I would call your attention to a class of phenomena along the same general lines, in which certain states of imagination or fancy are self-induced. Nearly all races of men have discovered that there are means possible to people whereby they may produce in themselves abnormal conditions known as the trance, dream states, transcendental conditions, etc. And men from the dim past to the present time have seen fit to indulge in these deplorable practices. The means by which these states are obtained are various, the favorite methods being the gazing at a bright object, fixing the gaze at the root of the nose, staring at the umbilicus, staring at the drop of ink, inhaling vapors, listening to weird music, etc. Much mock occultism, which is really psychism, depends upon these methods for its results, manifestation and phenomena. The Hindu thakas and the Arab dervishes indulge freely in these methods and produce results which, while highly esteemed by themselves, are viewed with disgust, horror and repulsion by true occultists of all lands, who regard these practices as harmful and the phenomena resulting therefrom as bogus and misleading. And much of the latter-day Western psychism is also based upon the same practices and brings about like results. In this connection, I would say that some of the practices adopted by some of the New Age people belong to this class. I have seen certain methods advised for going into the silence, in which the student is advised to focus his gaze on the root of his nose, etc., which is the identical method used by Braid to produce hypnotic conditions and which is also used by the Hindu Thakas to produce trance conditions. Is it not time that the truth regarding these things should be known? This trance phenomena, whether produced by mesmeric processes or by other means, are abnormal, unhealthy, and undesirable phases of mental condition. I cannot speak too strongly against the encouragement of and instruction in the development of these abnormal states, either by self-practice or by means of hypnotic or mesmeric methods. It is high time that someone should call the attention of the public to the dangers of this so-called psychism. I know positively that this kind of psychism is not the desirable thing that it is supposed to be. I know also that it is very far from true occult development. This kind of psychism, when compared with true occultism, is but as the baleful glare of the moon, as contrasted with the bright, warm, life-giving rays of the sun. This false occultism, which is not occultism at all, but merely a negative form of psychism, has deluded many into its fold, and has led its followers on to planes which are akin to mental quagmires and swamps, following the ignis fatuus or will-o-wisps of this pseudo-spirituality which is but a negative form of psychism. These self-induced abnormal conditions may be produced by hypnotic methods, by leading the subject into a deeper stage which some authorities speak of as if they were highly spiritual, but which are nothing more than the miserable, abnormal, deplorable trance conditions just referred to. These conditions may be produced by hypnotic methods simply because any mental state may be so produced, and not because of any mystic process or knowledge or connection. They resemble the so-called sleep conditions of hypnotism. The only difference is that the operator induces the conditions by mental influence and suggestion, just as he would induce any other mental state. Instead of the subject inducing it in himself, it is the same old abnormal, harmful practice in another guise, and anything that is said against the self-induced condition is equally applicable to the operator-induced one. They are the same thing. It is all hypnosis or auto-hypnosis. I shall not describe the conditions at further length, nor shall I give any instructions in the production of them. I consider them essentially harmful, and my object in speaking of them here is to warn off and caution people not to allow themselves to be placed in these conditions by experimenters. The practice is weakening to the will for the reason that it depends upon the tiring of the attention by straining the eyes or other organs of sense. Practitioners of menial influence in all ages have recognized this fact and have employed objects calculated to tire out the attention. Bright objects to stare at and thus tire out the sense of sight have been employed. Monotonous sound ending in are used by the Orientals to tire out the sense of hearing by its monotonous and soothing sound. Vapors and perfumes and incense are used to overcome the sense of smell, all tending to tire out the will and to reduce it to a passive, non-resisting stage. Then when the will has been rendered passive or tired, the mind becomes receptive and impressionable, and in extreme cases becomes as wax in the hands of the operator. Let me urge upon you to avoid this abnormal psychism. Put it away from you as you would a poisonous cobra, for it seeks to strike at the heart of your will, and would thus paralyze your mentality. Beware of all that tends to make you weak. Beware of the claims of soul development or spiritual unfoldment that are accompanied by these methods, for they are but psychism masquerading as occultism or spiritual development. Remember my test. Does this make me strong? Apply the touchstone and then govern yourself accordingly. Concluding this part of the subject, I would say that if any of you are disposed to question the correctness of my above statement, then you have but to examine the types of psychics seen on all sides. Are they not all hyper-impressionable, excessively sensitive, neurotic, hysterical, passive, negative people? Do they not become as mere psychic harps upon which the passing mental breezes play, producing weird sounds? Remember, now, I'm speaking of genuine psychics, not the bogus psychics who are out for the money and who are a shrewd, cunning lot, far from being impressionable and in reality using their mesmeric powers to impress and influence the credulous persons coming under their influence. I'm not alluding to these people, but to the poor, frail-willed, negative sensitives who are as impressionable as the photographer's negative, and to whom also the development means but the bringing out of impressions from outside. I pray you, be a human positive, not a human negative.